Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My world is a universe of intricate, microscopic order. It is a place of steady hands, of quiet patience, of the slow, methodical restoration of time itself. My name is Elias, and I am a horologist, a watchmaker. I do not just fix watches, I resurrect them. I take the beautiful, broken, and forgotten machines of the past and I coax them back to life. My workshop is a sanctuary of silence, broken only by the gentle, rhythmic ticking of a dozen different hearts, each one a testament to the idea that with enough care, enough precision, anything that has stopped can be made to start again. I believe this to be true not just of the delicate, interlocking gears and springs on my workbench, but of my own life, of my own marriage. For 15 years, I had applied the same philosophy to my relationship with my wife, Cassandra. I was the quiet, steady, and utterly predictable balance wheel in the complex, high-velocity mechanism of her life. She was a world of brilliant, chaotic energy, a venture capitalist. Her days were a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings, of ruthless negotiations, of a language of funding rounds and market caps that I, in my quiet, analog world, could barely comprehend. I was her anchor, her quiet harbor, the one unchanging constant in her universe of perpetual high-stakes motion. Our love, I believed, was the mainspring of our shared life, the source of the quiet, dependable power that allowed her to be the brilliant, conquering force she was. I was the man behind the woman, the silent, unassuming engineer who kept the machine running smoothly. I did not resent this role. I cherished it. Her victories were my victories. The light that shone from her was, I believed, a reflection of the quiet, steady flame I tended to at home. I was a man who had found his purpose not in his own ambition, but in the service of hers. The house we lived in, a stark, beautiful testament to minimalist architecture and her expensive taste, was her world. My workshop, a small, cluttered room in the basement, was mine. It was a perfect, if asymmetrical, balance. I was a man who understood the value of time. I knew that relationships, like the delicate movements of an antique watch, required maintenance, patience, and a gentle, steady hand. In the last few years, I had felt a change in the rhythm of our life. The mechanism had begun to run a little fast, a little erratically. The quiet, comfortable silences between us had been replaced by a new, more brittle kind of quiet, the silence of a space that is full of unspoken things. Her business trips became longer, more frequent. Her successes became more spectacular, and her presence at home more fleeting, more ghost-like. She was a comet, and I was a small, quiet planet watching her brilliant, fiery arc from a greater and greater distance. I told myself it was the pressure of her job. I told myself that this was the price of the life she was building for us. I was the patient watchmaker. I would wait. I would continue to provide the quiet, steady, and unconditional support that was my function, my purpose, my love. I believed that eventually the mechanism would settle, that the rhythm would return, that we would find our harmony again. I was a fool. I was a man trying to regulate a watch that had already been smashed against a wall. The moment the mainspring of my life snapped was a Thursday. It was the evening of her greatest triumph. She had just closed a deal of unprecedented size, a multi-hundred-million-dollar acquisition that had made her a legend in her field. The entire city was talking about her. She was a supernova, and her light was blinding. She came home late, long after I had gone to bed. I was awoken by the sound of her in the kitchen, the clinking of a bottle and a glass. I came downstairs. She was standing by the large plate glass window that overlooked the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. She was holding a glass of champagne, her face illuminated by the city's glow. She looked like a queen, surveying her new kingdom. She did not look like my wife. I came and stood beside her. I did not touch her. I could feel a new, strange, and unbridgeable distance between us, a pane of cold, invisible glass. "Congratulations," I said, my voice a quiet, humble sound in the vast, silent space of her victory. "I heard about the deal. It's incredible, Cass. I'm so proud of you." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. She did not look at me. She just stared out at the city lights. "Are you, Elias?" she said, her voice a low, cool, and utterly unfamiliar thing. "Are you really proud? Or are you just comfortable?" The question was a small, sharp, and perfectly placed blade inserted between my ribs. "I don't understand," I said. She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes, the eyes I had loved for 15 years, the eyes that had been my only true compass, were the eyes of a stranger. They were cold and clear and full of a profound and deeply weary pity. "That's the problem, isn't it?" she said, her voice not cruel, just factual. "You never do. You are a good man, Elias. You are kind. You are steady. You are the most decent human being I have ever known. And I cannot stand the sight of you." The words were not shouted. They were spoken with the quiet, devastating precision of a surgeon making a final, fatal incision. "I cannot stand the sight of you." It was not an accusation. It was a diagnosis, a statement of an incurable and terminal condition. My presence in her life was not a comfort. It was an irritant. My quiet, steady love was not her anchor. It was her cage. My entire life, my entire identity as her husband, her partner, her supporter, was a role in a play that she had grown to despise. I stood there, and I felt the intricate, beautiful, and impossibly complex mechanism of my own heart, the one I had so carefully tended to for so long, simply stop. The mainspring had snapped. The gears had seized. The hands were frozen. Time, for me, was over. There was nothing to say. There were no arguments to be made. There were no repairs to be attempted. You cannot fix a thing that does not want to be fixed. You cannot restore a love that has not just died, but that has curdled into a form of active, weary contempt. The watchmaker in me, the man who understood the final, unforgiving logic of a broken machine, knew that there was only one, single, and necessary action to be taken. I simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance, of surrender. And then I turned. I walked out of the room. I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, a room that was no longer ours. I did not pack a bag. I did not take a single physical object from the life we had built. To do so would have been to admit that some part of it still belonged to me. I simply went to my closet, and I put on a different pair of shoes, a pair of sturdy, comfortable walking shoes. I went to my desk, and I took my wallet. I took my keys. I walked back down the stairs. She had not moved. She was still standing by the window, a beautiful, lonely, and now completely alien statue. I did not look at her as I passed. I walked to the front door. I opened it, and I stepped out into the quiet, sleeping, and indifferent world. As I closed the door behind me, the soft, expensive click of the lock was the last sound I would ever hear of the life I had once called my own. I did not have a destination. I did not have a plan. I was a man who had just been, in the quietest, most civilized, and most brutal way possible, erased. And my only remaining function, it seemed, was to complete the job myself. I was a ghost, and it was time for me to disappear. I walked to the nearest bank machine. I had our joint account card. I knew the balance. I knew exactly what my half was. I withdrew it, all of it, a single, clean, and final transaction. And then I dropped the card into a nearby trash can. I walked to the bus station, and I bought a ticket for the first bus that was leaving, a long, rattling journey to a place I had never been, a place whose only virtue was that it was not here.
As the bus pulled away from the station, I looked back at the glittering, beautiful, and now completely hostile skyline of the city that had been my home. I felt no sadness, I felt no anger, I felt only a profound and deeply peaceful sense of nothing. I was a watch that had been completely and irreparably broken, but I was also, for the first time in a very long time, free. The hands were no longer moving, and the time, at long last, was all my own. The town I landed in was a place that time seemed to have forgotten, a small, gritty, and deeply unbeautiful industrial city in the heart of the Rust Belt. It was the antithesis of the sleek, glittering, and upwardly mobile world I had just left. The air here smelt not of money and ambition, but of coal dust and the faint, metallic tang of decay. It was a place of broken factories, of boarded-up storefronts, of men with quiet, weary eyes and hands that were as calloused as my own. It was, in other words, the perfect place for a ghost to disappear. My new life was a study in systematic erasure. I was a man who had spent his life building things, preserving things. Now, my only project was my own quiet and methodical deconstruction. I rented a small, furnished room above a bar, a place that was a constant, low-grade hum of noise and cheap beer. I paid in cash. I gave a false name, Elias Vance. It was the first name that came to my mind, a simple, anonymous, and blessedly meaningless combination of sounds. The man who was Elias Quinn, the master horologist, the quiet, devoted husband of the brilliant Cassandra Quinn, was dead.
He had died in a beautiful, minimalist penthouse on a Thursday night. I was just the quiet, unassuming ghost who had been left behind. I needed to work, not for the money, though the stack of cash I had taken would not last forever, but for the silence. The silence in my own head was a roaring, deafening thing, a cacophony of memories, of her voice, of the four quiet and eternally echoing words. I needed a new noise to drown it out. I found a job in a place that was a cathedral of noise, a place as far removed from the meditative silence of my old workshop as it was possible to be. It was an old, sprawling, and deeply chaotic machine shop, a place that built and repaired the massive industrial engines that powered the river barges and the freight trains. It was a world of screaming metal lathes, of the concussive, rhythmic slam of hydraulic presses, of the angry blue-white hiss of welding torches. And it was a world where I, with my steady hands and my innate mechanical understanding of how things work, was surprisingly at home. I was hired as a general laborer, a grease monkey. My job was to clean engine parts, to sweep the metal shavings from the floor, to be the lowest, most insignificant gear in this massive, roaring machine. I did not tell them of my past. I did not speak of my skills. I was a blank slate, a man with no history, no references, and a quiet, desperate willingness to do the hard, dirty work that no one else wanted. The owner of the shop was a man named Sal, a huge, bearded, and surprisingly gentle man who seemed to be carved from the same solid and unbreakable iron as the machines he commanded. He did not ask questions. He simply looked at my hands, at the fine, callous network of a lifetime of precision work, and he saw not a watchmaker, but a man who understood the language of metal. The work was a brutal and deeply necessary form of therapy. It was a physical penance for the sins of a life that had been too soft, too quiet, too cerebral. My body, which had been the soft indoor body of a craftsman, was broken down and rebuilt by the sheer grinding reality of the labor. My hands, which had been trained to handle the most delicate of instruments, became blunt, powerful, and permanently stained with a grease that no amount of soap could ever truly wash away. I would come back to my small, lonely room at night, my body a single, continuous ache, and I would fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, the only kind of sleep I had known in years. The noise of the workshop was a shield, and the exhaustion was a balm. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not thinking. I was just surviving. I did not allow myself to look back. I did not go online. I did not read the news.
The world of Cassandra Quinn, the world of venture capital, of glittering parties, of a life that was now a foreign country, was a place I had forbidden myself to visit, even in my thoughts. I was a man in a self-imposed exile, and the terms of that exile were absolute. For 2 years, this was my life. I was Elias Vance, the quiet guy from the machine shop, the man who lived above the bar, the ghost who had no past. I was, in a strange and deeply unexpected way, content. I had found a new kind of order, a new kind of logic in the brutal, honest, and deeply unsentimental world of the machine shop. A gear either works or it does not. A weld either holds or it fails. There is no room for interpretation, for nuance, for the kind of beautiful and ultimately fatal lies that had been the foundation of my old life. Sal, my boss, became my friend, my only friend. It was a friendship built not on words, but on a shared, unspoken understanding of the language of machines. He saw that I was more than just a laborer. He saw the way I would look at a broken engine, the way I could diagnose its failure with an almost intuitive precision. He began to give me more complex work, to trust me with the delicate, surgical work of rebuilding a failing gearbox, of recalibrating a complex hydraulic system. I was a watchmaker again, of a sort. My patient was just 1,000 times larger and 1,000,000 times louder. My past, the one I had so carefully and so completely tried to bury, began to resurface, not as a ghost, but as a skill. One day, Sal brought me a small metal box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a beautiful and deeply broken antique ship's chronometer. It was a masterpiece of old-world craftsmanship, a complex, beautiful, and utterly non-functional machine. My grandfather's, Sal said, his voice a low, respectful grumble. He was a captain on the Great Lakes. This was his heart. It hasn't ticked in 50 years. I've taken it to a dozen different jewelers, watchmakers. They all say the same thing. It's a lost cause. The parts don't exist anymore. I took the chronometer in my hands. I held it. I felt the dead, silent weight of it. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt a flicker of the man I used to be. The man who believed that anything, with enough patience, with enough care, could be made to start again. "Let me see what I can do," I said. It took me 6 months. I worked on it at night in my small room above the bar with a set of jeweler's tools I had bought online, sent to a post office box under my new false name. I had to machine the new parts myself from scratch, using the larger, cruder tools of the machine shop to create the microscopic, delicate gears and springs that were needed. It was a slow, patient, and deeply meditative process. It was an act of resurrection.
And one night, after 6 months of painstaking, obsessive work, I gave the balance wheel a final, gentle push, and it began to tick. A quiet, steady, and deeply, profoundly beautiful sound. The sound of a heart starting to beat again. The next day, I gave the chronometer back to Sal. He just held it in his big, calloused hands, listening to the sound of it. His face a mask of gruff and deeply moved disbelief. He did not say thank you. He did something else. He offered me a partnership. He wanted me to open a new division of his business, a specialty shop for the restoration of antique precision machinery. He wanted to give me a future, a real one, a life. It was a crossroads, a choice. To remain a ghost, the anonymous and safe Elias Vance, or to risk becoming a real person again, to risk having a name, a business, a life that could be found. I did not know what to do. The fear, the old familiar fear of the world, of connection, of the possibility of another catastrophic failure, was a powerful gravitational force. And then a message arrived from a world I had thought was dead and buried. Sal came to me one afternoon, a worried look on his face. "There's a man here to see you, Elias," he said. "A fancy guy, a lawyer. Says it's important. Says it's about your wife." My heart, The one I had so carefully and so painstakingly rebuilt stopped ticking. The past was not a ghost, it was a debt collector, and it had finally, after all this time, found my new address. The lawyer was a man who did not belong in the gritty, honest world of Sal's machine shop. He was a creature of a different, more polished ecosystem, a man who looked like he had been assembled in a boardroom. His suit was a sharp, architectural marvel of gray wool. His shoes shone with a light that seemed alien in this world of grease and metal dust. And his face was a mask of cool, professional detachment. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies, and he represented, he said, a client who had a vested interest in the financial affairs of Cassandra Quinn, my wife. The name, spoken aloud in this new, safe world I had built, was a violation, a shard of glass in the gears of my new life. I took him to the small, cluttered office at the back of the shop, a place that smelled of old paper and industrial-strength coffee. I did not offer him a seat. We were not friends. We were not colleagues. We were two opposing forces, and I was not going to give him the advantage of comfort. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice a low, flat sound, the voice of a man who has forgotten how to perform the cheap social theater of polite conversation. He did not seem to notice or to care. He was all business. He opened his expensive leather briefcase and took out a thin, elegant folder. "I have been retained by a consortium of investors," he began, his voice a smooth, practiced, and utterly soulless monotone, "who have a significant financial exposure to Miss Quinn's current venture capital fund, Apex Innovations." The name was new to me, but the game was not. "She's a venture capitalist," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "That's what she does." "Indeed," Davies said, a flicker of something that might have been a grim professional respect in his eyes. "And for many years, she was one of the very best. Her instincts were legendary. Her ability to identify and nurture fledgling companies was unparalleled. My clients made a great deal of money by following her lead." He paused, and his eyes met mine. "But in the last 2 years," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "something has changed. The fund, which was once a titan of the industry, is now hemorrhaging. Her instincts seem to have deserted her. Her last 6 major investments have been catastrophic failures. She has become erratic, impulsive, reckless. My clients are facing a loss of a magnitude that is, for them, unacceptable. And they have hired me to understand why." I just stared at him. The story he was telling was an impossible one. Cassandra, the brilliant, ruthless, and infallible Cassandra, was failing? The woman who had left me because my world was too small, too slow, too cautious, was now being accused of being reckless? It was a logical contradiction, a flaw in the system that my mind could not immediately process. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, my voice a low growl. "We have conducted an extensive and very discreet investigation into Miss Quinn's life," Davies said, his gaze unwavering. "We have analyzed her financials, her social patterns, her professional network. We have been trying to identify the variable, the external factor, that could explain this sudden and catastrophic degradation of her performance. And our investigation has led us, inexplicably, to you." He opened the folder, and he laid a series of photographs out on the dusty, cluttered surface of Sal's desk. The first was a picture of me, a grainy, long-lens shot, taken a few weeks ago of me walking into this very machine shop. The second was a copy of my old professional bio from my watchmaking business. The third was a copy of my marriage certificate. "You are Elias Quinn," Davies said, his voice not a question, but a statement. "Master horologist, husband of Cassandra Quinn, a man who, 2 years ago, after a quiet and apparently amicable separation, simply disappeared. You closed your business. You emptied your half of the joint accounts. You left no forwarding address, no note, no explanation. You vanished from her life and from the face of the earth." He looked at me, his sharp lawyer's eyes trying to read the tales on my own impassive face. "And it is at the precise statistical moment of your disappearance," he said, his voice now a quiet and deeply significant whisper, "that her legendary, golden touch seems to have disappeared as well." I said nothing. I was a man who was listening to a stranger describe the precise and previously unknown blast radius of a bomb that had gone off in my own life 2 years ago. I had thought the only casualty had been me. But the story Davies was telling was a different and far more complex one. "My clients have a theory, Mr. Quinn," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "A theory that is based not on finance, but on a kind of crude psychology. They believe that you were not just her husband. They believe you were her anchor, her balance wheel, the quiet, steady, and utterly predictable counterweight to her own high-velocity and high-risk genius. They believe that your presence, your stability, your boringness, if you'll forgive the term, was the secret and essential ingredient in her success, and that without you, her entire complex and brilliant mechanism has gone haywire." He let the words hang in the air. The irony was so profound, so absolute, that it was almost a physical thing. The very quality she had despised in me, the quiet, careful, and methodical nature of my own soul, were the very things that had, it seemed, been the secret fuel for her brilliant, fiery success. I had not been the cage that had held her back. I had been the foundation upon which her entire glittering skyscraper had been built. And when the foundation had been removed, the entire structure had begun, slowly and inevitably, to fail. "So," Davy said, his voice pulling me back from the abyss of my own reeling thoughts, "my clients have a proposal for you. It is an unorthodox proposal, but we are in an unorthodox situation." He pushed a single folded document across the desk towards me. I did not touch it. "They want you back in her life," he said, his voice a flat, businesslike tone. "Not as a husband, not as a lover, but as an asset, a consultant. They are prepared to offer you a substantial, 7-figure sum simply to exist, to be a presence in her orbit again, to have a coffee with her once a week, to be the quiet, steadying influence that her own, and more importantly their, portfolio so desperately seems to require. They believe that if they can reintroduce the stable variable, your variable, back into her system, that the system will, in time, correct itself." I stared at the folded document on the desk. It was the most ludicrous, the most insulting, and the most deeply, profoundly, and surreal proposal I had ever encountered. These men, these faceless, powerful masters of the universe, were not trying to reunite a broken marriage. They were trying to execute a corporate turnaround strategy. And I, Elias Quinn, the quiet, broken watchmaker who now worked as a grease monkey in a machine shop, was their secret and apparently priceless key. "And what if I refuse?" I asked, my voice a quiet, dangerous thing. Davies just smiled, a thin, bloodless, and utterly reptilian smile. "Then the fund will likely collapse within the next 6 months," he said with a shrug. "My clients will lose a great deal of money, and your wife, Miss Quinn, will be left with nothing. She will be ruined, professionally and financially. A brilliant but ultimately failed star. The choice, Mr. Quinn, is entirely yours." He stood up. He put his photographs back in his folder. "My card is on the desk," he said. "You have until Friday to decide. I would advise you to think of it not as a personal matter, but as a business decision, the most profitable one you are ever likely to make." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet, dusty office with the silent, ticking, and utterly impossible time bomb of his proposal. I was being offered a fortune to play the part of the man I used to be, in order to save the woman who had shattered my life, for the benefit of a group of men who saw us both as nothing more than variables in a very, very large and very, very broken equation. The absurdity of it all was a high, thin, and hysterical sound in my own head.
It was the sound of a spring wound far too tight, finally and completely letting go.
For 3 days, I lived with the lawyer's proposal. It was a ghost, a constant, whispering presence in my new, quiet life. The document, which I had not opened, sat on the small table in my rented room, a silent, powerful, and deeply obscene object. The number that was likely written inside it, the 7-figure sum, was a promise of a life I had never known, a life of ease, of luxury, of a freedom from the simple, grinding realities of my own physical existence. It was a temptation, it was a poison, and it was a choice. My first and most powerful instinct was to burn the document, to call Davies and to tell him and his faceless, powerful clients to go to hell, to remain a ghost, to stay in my quiet, honest, and blessedly simple world of machines and solitude. My life with Cassandra was over. Her failures, her struggles, her impending ruin, it was no longer my concern. I had paid my dues. I had served my time. I owed her nothing. But the engineer in me, the watchmaker, the man who is constitutionally incapable of walking away from a beautiful, broken, and complex machine, could not let it go. The problem, the beautiful, tragic, and utterly fascinating problem of Cassandra Quinn, was a mechanism that I, and only I, truly understood. Her success had not been in spite of me, but because of me. The thought was not a source of pride, but a source of a profound and deeply unsettling responsibility. I was a part of her system. My absence had caused its failure. Did I not, then, have a moral, if not a marital, obligation to at least try to understand the nature of the repair that was needed? I was not contemplating a reconciliation. The love I had felt for her was a dead thing, a beautiful antique watch that had been so completely and so violently smashed that no amount of skill could ever make it tick again. But the woman herself, the brilliant, flawed, and now deeply broken woman, she was still there. And she was, it seemed, on a trajectory towards a self-destruction that was far more total and far more catastrophic than the simple, quiet end of our marriage. My decision was not to accept their offer. My decision was to conduct one final and deeply personal diagnostic. I had to see her. I had to look into her eyes and see for myself if the woman I had once known was still in there, or if she had been completely consumed by the ghost of her own brilliant and self-destructive ambition. I called Davies. I did not accept his client's proposal. I made a counter-proposal. I would meet with her. Once. I would not discuss money. I would not discuss a consulting arrangement. I would simply talk to her. And after that, I would make my decision. Davies, a man who understood the value of a high-stakes negotiation, agreed. The meeting was arranged. The location was a place of my choosing. A quiet, neutral, and deeply symbolic territory. A small, forgotten museum of horology, of the history of timekeeping. A place I had not been to in years. A place that was, in its own way, a temple to my old and now long-dead self. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing in front of a glass case that contained a beautiful and impossibly complex 18th-century marine chronometer. The same kind of chronometer I had, in a different lifetime it now seemed, restored for Sal. She was a stranger. The powerful, confident, and conquering queen from my memories was gone. In her place was a woman who looked lost. She was thinner, her face was pale, and there were dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. The expensive architectural suit she was wearing seemed to hang on her, a costume for a role she was no longer able to play. She was a watch that had been wound too tight for too long, and now the mainspring was broken. She turned, and she saw me. And in her eyes, I saw not anger, not defiance. I saw a flicker of something that I had not seen in a very long time, a look of profound and deeply weary relief, as if the one, single, and necessary gear that had been missing from her world had just unexpectedly and inexplicably clicked back into place. We did not speak of lawyers or of money or of her failing fund. We walked in silence through the quiet, ticking halls of the museum. And then we sat on a bench in a room that was filled with the gentle, chaotic, and beautiful symphony of 100 different ticking clocks. "I read about your work," she finally said, her voice a quiet, rusty whisper. "The chronometer. For Sal's shop. There was an article in a trade magazine. It was a beautiful story." "It was a beautiful machine," I said. "It just needed a new balance wheel." We sat in silence again for a long moment. "I broke, didn't I?" she said, her voice not a question, but a statement of a quiet and deeply understood fact. "After you left, my work, my life, it came unwound." "Why?" I asked. It was the only question that mattered. "Because I had spent my entire life," she said, her eyes fixed on the slow, steady swing of a pendulum in a grandfather clock across the room, running. Running from the quiet, from the stillness, running from the part of me that was terrified that if I ever stopped, I would discover that there was nothing there. And you were my stillness. You were the one single person in the world who was not impressed by my noise. You were the only one who was not running. You were just there. And I hated you for it, because it reminded me of the one thing I could not do myself." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of a clear, cold, and deeply honest tear. "I did not leave you because I couldn't stand you, Elias," she whispered. "I left you because I could not stand myself. And I thought that if I could just get far enough away from your quiet, steady, and unbearable truth, I could finally outrun my own." I had come to this meeting expecting to find a monster, a villain, a cold, calculating, and unrepentant architect of my own ruin. But the woman sitting next to me was not a monster. She was just a person, a brilliant, flawed, and deeply, profoundly human person who had made a catastrophic and life-altering mistake. "I did not leave you because I couldn't stand you, Elias," she whispered. "I left you because I could not stand myself. And I thought that if I could just get far enough away from your quiet, steady, and unbearable truth, I could finally outrun my own." I had come to this meeting expecting to find a monster, a villain, a cold, calculating, and unrepentant architect of my own ruin. But the woman sitting next to me was not a monster. She was just a person, a brilliant, flawed, and deeply, profoundly human person who had made a catastrophic and life-altering mistake. "I did not leave you because I couldn't stand you, Elias," she whispered. "I left you because I could not stand myself. And I thought that if I could just get far enough away from your quiet, steady, and unbearable truth, I could finally outrun my own." And in that moment, in the quiet, ticking, and deeply honest heart of that museum, the last hard and frozen piece of my own angry heart finally and completely let go. The love I had felt for her was gone, but the anger, the hatred, the need for a reckoning, it was gone too. All that was left was a kind of vast, quiet, and deeply peaceful sadness, a sadness for the two foolish and deeply broken people we had been. I stood up. "The machine isn't broken, Cass," I said, my voice quiet and for the first time not a performance, but a simple and honest truth. "It's just out of calibration." I reached into my pocket and I took out the business card that Davies had given me. I placed it on the bench between us. "These are the people you need to call," I said. "They want to invest in you, but they need to be managed. You need a partner, not a lover. A real partner, someone who understands the mechanism, someone who can help you find your balance again." She just stared at the card, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending disbelief. "But she stammered. "I have my own work to do," I said, and I smiled. A real smile, the first real smile in 2 years. "I have a very important and very beautiful old machine that needs my attention." And with that, I turned and I walked away.
I did not accept the money. I did not become her consultant. I did not go back. I simply gave her the one single thing I had always been meant to give her, a small, quiet, and perfectly calibrated adjustment that would allow her own beautiful and complex machine to finally and truly start ticking again on its own. I went back to my shop. I went back to my quiet, honest, and deeply satisfying life. I had not won. I had not lost. I had simply and finally found the correct and proper balance. You've been listening to Reddit Whispers. When did you realize life would never be the same again? Share your story. It could mean everything to someone else.